Maya Singh stood on the tarmac of the small airport in Kathmandu, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as she gazed up at the looming peak of Mount Everest in the distance. She had dreamt of this moment for years, ever since she was a young girl reading books about adventurers who had scaled the world's highest mountain. Now, finally, she was here, about to embark on a journey that would test her physical and mental limits in ways she could only imagine. She glanced around at her group of friends, all of whom were similarly thrilled to be here, but also somewhat apprehensive about what lay ahead. Maya had done her research and knew that the journey ahead would be grueling, requiring a combination of physical strength, mental toughness, and sheer determination. She had trained for months, running, hiking, and weightlifting in preparation for this moment. As the group gathered their bags and began to make their way towards the exit, Maya couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline as she thought about what lay ahead. The mountains seemed to call to her, beckoning her forward, promising adventure and challenge in equal measure. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the hot, humid air of Kathmandu, ready to begin the journey of a lifetime. As the group set out on their hike up Mount Everest, Maya felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. They slowly ascended the mountain, taking careful steps to acclimate to the high altitude. The air grew thinner as they climbed higher, and Maya found herself gasping for breath more often than she would like. The first few days passed without incident, but the group began to experience strange occurrences that made them increasingly uneasy. They heard noises in the night that they couldn't explain, and they sometimes felt as though they were being watched. One night, Maya awoke to find that her tent had been partially unzipped, even though she was sure she had closed it all the way before going to sleep. She felt a chill run down her spine as she looked out into the darkness, wondering what could have caused the disturbance. As the group hiked higher up the mountain, the strange occurrences continued to multiply. Some of their equipment began to malfunction, and they found strange markings etched into the snow around their campsite. Maya tried to keep a level head, reminding herself that the mountain was dangerous and unpredictable. But as the days passed and the strange occurrences continued, she couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong on Mount Everest. The atmosphere on the mountain grew increasingly tense as the group climbed higher. They had been hiking for days, and the physical strain was beginning to take its toll on everyone. The altitude made even the simplest tasks feel like monumental challenges, and tempers began to fray. One night, as the group huddled around a small fire, they heard a blood-curdling scream in the distance. They jumped to their feet, their hearts pounding with fear as they tried to locate the source of the noise. But the darkness and the wind made it impossible to see or hear anything. The next morning, they discovered that one of their group members was missing. They searched frantically for any sign of their friend, but there was no trace of him. As the group gathered around to discuss what they should do next, they heard a strange, otherworldly sound coming from the direction of the mountain. They cautiously moved towards the noise, their hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. As they drew closer, they saw a figure emerging from the swirling snow. It was their missing friend, but he looked different somehow. His eyes were glazed over, and his skin was as white as the snow around them. Suddenly, he let out another blood-curdling scream, and the group realized with growing horror that something was very wrong with their friend. They tried to approach him, but he lunged at them with an otherworldly strength that seemed impossible for a human to possess. As their friend attacked them with an inhuman ferocity, the group scrambled to defend themselves. They tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but it was no use. His eyes were empty, his mind consumed by some unknown force. One by one, their friend began to pick off members of the group, his movements almost too fast to track. The remaining survivors huddled together, trying to find a way to stop him. They could barely speak, their voices hoarse from the cold and their fear. As the night wore on, they realized that their only hope was to try and make it down the mountain to safety. But the blizzard raged around them, obscuring their vision and making it almost impossible to find their way. They stumbled blindly through the snow, their limbs numb from the cold. And still their friend pursued them, his inhuman screams echoing through the mountain air. The survivors knew that they had to find a way to stop him, but they were running out of time. Finally, they came upon a small cave, and they huddled inside, hoping that their friend wouldn't be able to find them. They were barely able to catch their breath before they heard the sound of their friend's footsteps approaching. They knew that this was it, their final chance to stop him before it was too late. The survivors were on the brink of collapse as they heard their friend's footsteps drawing closer. They knew that this was their final stand. They prepared themselves as best they could with the limited resources they had left. When their friend finally arrived, he was almost unrecognizable. His clothes were torn, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. The survivors could barely bring themselves to look at him, but they knew that they had to fight. As their friend lunged at them, the survivors fought back with everything they had. They used their ice axes, their crampons, anything that they could get their hands on. But their friend was almost invincible, dodging and weaving around them with an inhuman grace. Just as they thought all was lost, the survivors remembered the legend of the snowy ghost that haunted Mount Everest. They realized that their friend had been possessed by the vengeful spirit of the mountain, and that the only way to stop him was to perform a ritual to exorcise the ghost. With little time to spare, the survivors gathered what they could and began the ritual. They chanted and prayed, and as the sun rose over the mountain, the snowy ghost was finally defeated. The survivors were battered and bruised, but they had survived the ordeal. They made their way down the mountain and back to civilization, forever changed by the horrors that they had faced on Mount Everest.